The enemy commander pointed at the ridge map and laughed. "One female sniper," he said, circling the position with his finger. "Send 3 waves. I want that ridge buried." His men didn't question it. They had numbers armor and darkness on their side. She had nothing but a rifle and a hollow full of wounded soldiers who couldn't run. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel and follow Elena's battle all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Karvash was barely large enough for a folding table and 6 men standing shoulder to shoulder, but Colonel Haran Drast had never needed comfort to deliver bad news. He had a gift for it, actually, the kind of flat, unhurried voice that made catastrophe sound like routine. Sergeant Elena Voss stood at the far end of that table with her rifle case leaning against her leg and her hands loose at her sides. She had been summoned at 0400, which meant nobody was going to offer her coffee and nobody was going to spend time on pleasantries. That suited her fine. Drast didn't look up from the topographic map when she entered. He let her stand there for a full 30 seconds before he spoke. "Voss, sir, you know the Eastern Ridge." She knew it. Every soldier at Karvash knew it. The Eastern Ridge was the kind of terrain feature that appeared on maps in a way that looked almost manageable. A long spine of elevated ground running northeast to southwest along the upper range with a natural defensive advantage of elevation and limited approach corridors. On paper, it was a strong position. In reality, it was a nightmare. The ridge was exposed on 3 sides to wind that came off the glacier in sudden, rotating gusts that could shift 15 degrees in under a minute. The south slope was a fractured mess of loose shale and ice-glazed rock that made vehicle approach almost impossible, but infantry movement entirely viable if soldiers moved slowly enough. The north face dropped away into a ravine that nobody crossed in winter voluntarily, and the eastern approach, the one that gave the ridge its name, was a long, gradual climb that funneled everything and everyone into a single killing corridor that was either your greatest defensive asset or your coffin, depending on which side of it you occupied. Elena had studied that ridge 3 weeks ago, when the battalion first pushed into the Karvash range. She had spent 2 hours walking its length, noting the rock formations that could serve as natural hides, memorizing the distances to the tree lines below, calculating how the wind patterns would behave at different times of day. She had done this not because anyone told her to. She had done it because she was a sniper, and snipers understood that preparation was not a luxury. It was the only currency that actually mattered. "I know it," she said. Drast finally looked up. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of permanent squint that came from spending decades looking at things he didn't fully trust. He studied her the way a man studies a tool he isn't sure is rated for the job in front of him. "Enemy forces have been consolidating in the valley below the ridge for the past 72 hours, he said. "Reconnaissance puts their numbers at approximately 400 combat-effective personnel with light armor support drone coordination capability and at least 2 forward mortar teams. They are going to push for the ridge. Our analysts believe the assault begins within 18 hours, possibly less." Elena absorbed this without expression. "We are repositioning the main defensive line to the western pass," Drast continued. "It protects the supply corridor and gives us the ground we actually need to hold if this goes badly. The eastern ridge becomes a secondary position." She understood immediately what he wasn't saying. Secondary position meant limited reinforcement priority. It meant the ridge would be held with whatever was available rather than whatever was needed. "What's available?" she asked. Drast glanced at the lieutenant standing to his left, a young officer named Calloway, who had the unfortunate habit of looking like he wanted to apologize for things before they happened. Calloway pulled a folded sheet from his jacket pocket and opened it without quite meeting Elena's eyes. "You'll have 19 combat-ready personnel," Calloway said. "Mixed infantry, 2 crew-served weapons, 1 M240 team, and 1 anti-material rifle position already staged on the north end of the ridge. There are also 63 wounded personnel currently sheltering in the medical hollow approximately 300 meters behind the primary ridgeline. They cannot be moved. Air extraction is not available for at least 36 hours due to weather and operational priorities." The number landed in the room like something heavy dropped on a stone floor. 63 wounded, 19 fighters, an approaching force of 400. Elena looked at the map. She traced the elevation lines with her eyes. Not her finger. She had learned years ago never to touch a tactical map during a briefing, because the moment your finger made contact with paper, people started watching your finger instead of listening to your reasoning. "What's the wind forecast for the next 24 hours?" she asked. Calloway blinked. I'd have to check the meteorological report. "Northwest to west averaging 22 kilometers per hour with gusts up to 40 mph," said the weathered warrant officer, standing in the corner, a man named Tetch, who nobody had introduced but who clearly knew his business. "Temperature dropping through the night. Visibility will be intermittent. Cloud ceiling is unstable." Elena nodded slowly. Drass straightened up. "Voss, I'm going to be direct with you because there isn't time for anything else. And frankly, you deserve a straight answer." "I'd appreciate that, sir." "You cannot hold that position with 19 soldiers against 400. The math does not work. The ridge can be contested. It can be made painful and costly for whoever comes up that slope, but it cannot be held indefinitely. Our goal is to delay the enemy advance long enough to consolidate the Western Pass defense, and when weather permits, extract the wounded from the medical hollow. That is the mission. Delay, not victory. Understand?" "I understand the mission," Elena said. "Good." Drast held her gaze. "I'm assigning you as senior NCO for the Eastern Ridge position, effective immediately." The lieutenant shifted his weight. One of the other officers in the room, a heavy-set captain named Morrow, who had been quiet until this moment, let out a short breath through his nose that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sigh, but managed to carry the weight of an entire opinion without technically being either. Elena turned her head slightly in Morrow's direction. "Something to add, sir." Morrow met her eyes with the steady, unapologetic confidence of a man who had decided his rank gave him the right to say whatever he was thinking. "I'll say what I think, Voss. Command putting a female sniper at the center of this defense is not a decision I would have made. Not because of any personal sentiment. Because snipers work in pairs and in support of defensive lines, they don't run defensive lines. And because whatever your skills are at distance, running a 20-person perimeter against a 400-man assault is a command challenge, not a marksmanship challenge." The room was quiet. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the map. "When do they arrive?" she asked. Drast paused. Then quietly, "Our best estimate is dawn, possibly earlier." "Then I need to leave now," Elena said. "I want those crew-served positions relocated by 0600. I need a full ammunition inventory on my desk or whatever passes for a desk up there within the hour. And I need whoever is running communications at the ridge to have a direct channel to your position, not relayed through Calloway Station. Relay adds 8 seconds to every transmission. At dawn, 8 seconds is a long time." She picked up her rifle case. "And sir," she said, pausing at the door without turning around, "the math doesn't need to work for 400 against 19. It only needs to work for 1. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Morrow say quietly to no one in particular, "God help those soldiers." She wasn't sure if he meant the 19 on the ridge or the 400 coming up the slope. The road to the Eastern Ridge was a logging track that had been carved into the mountain face sometime in the previous century by people with a deeply optimistic view of what a road needed to be. It was wide enough for one vehicle moving carefully, bordered on the left by a rock face and on the right by a drop that nobody had bothered to put a guardrail on because the men who built the road had apparently believed that if you were driving up here, you already knew what you were doing. Elena rode in the back of a supply vehicle with 3 soldiers who had the specific, tightly controlled silence of people who had just been told something they were still processing. The driver, a young specialist named Tomas, who looked about 22 and was almost certainly 22, gripped the wheel like it owed him something and kept his eyes forward with the determination of a man pretending not to be afraid. Behind Elena in the cargo bed were 2 soldiers she had specifically requested after reviewing the personnel roster: Corporal Danny Reyes, a combat medic with 2 prior deployments and a reputation for functioning competently under pressure, that had been independently verified by 3 officers whose opinions Elena trusted, and Specialist Marcus Webb, a designated marksman who had grown up hunting elk in Wyoming, and who had, according to his fitness report, demonstrated the kind of patient, deliberate trigger discipline that most soldiers never fully developed, regardless of how much training they received. She had also noticed, reading between the lines of Webb's evaluation, that he had a tendency to argue with authority when he thought authority was wrong. Under most circumstances, that was a liability. Under these circumstances, she would rather have someone who would tell her when she was making a mistake than someone who would watch her make it and say nothing. The truck ground upward through the dark. Reyes spoke first, which Elena had expected. Reyes was not the type to hold a thought indefinitely. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "You're going to regardless," Elena said. 63 wounded in that hollow. Are any of them ambulatory? 14. The other 49 are either post-surgical or immobile. So we have 14 who can potentially contribute to the defense if it comes to that. If it comes to that, we arm whoever can hold a weapon and make sure they understand their sector. But that's a last option, Reyes, not a first one. Our job is to make sure it doesn't come to that. Webb spoke from the cargo bed without looking up from the equipment he was quietly checking in the dark. "Sergeant, with respect, I've been looking at the approach angles for the south slope, and I think there's a problem with where command staged the M240 position." Elena turned her head toward him. "Go on." "North end of the ridge puts that gun team at a firing angle that gives them coverage of the eastern approach corridor, which is good. But it leaves the south slope, the shale field, almost completely uncovered in its lower third. If a strike team knows what they're doing, they can advance through that lower third using the rock formations as concealment and not enter the M240's effective coverage until they're already within grenade range." Elena said nothing for a moment. "You're right," she said. Don't sound surprised. You spent 2 minutes with a map and identified the same gap I identified 3 weeks ago when I walked that ridge." She paused. "The M240 is moving to the center ridge elevated position 40 meters south of where it's currently staged. That gives it overlapping coverage on both the shale field and the eastern corridor, with a depression to its right rear that serves as natural protection from direct fire." Webb was quiet for a moment. "Okay, yeah, that works." "I know it works. That's why I'm telling you." Reyes looked between them. "Is this how this whole operation is going to go? Because if so, I want to know now so I can emotionally prepare." Elena almost smiled. Almost. The truck stopped 40 meters below the ridge crest because the track ended there, the last stretch of approach, too steep and loose for vehicle movement. They climbed the rest of the way on foot in the dark, Elena moving at the front with her rifle slung and her pack balanced with the practiced ease of someone who had spent enough time on difficult terrain that her body had stopped negotiating with gravity and simply adapted. The wind hit her when she crested the ridgeline, and it was immediate and physical, a hard pressure against her chest that forced her to lean into it slightly before her footing adjusted. 40 kilometers per hour, she noted mentally, higher than forecast. She recalculated 3 variables simultaneously in the part of her brain that did this: automatically bullet drift at known distances, sound distortion effect on incoming fire, and visibility degradation rate if temperature dropped another 2 degrees. Sergeant First Class David Kyle met her at the crest. He was the ranking NCO currently on the ridge, a man of about 40 with 15 years of infantry experience and the specific bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had been awake for most of those 15 years. He shook her hand with the brief, firm grip of a man who had decided to reserve judgment until he had more information. "Voss, I've got your positions mapped. You want the full rundown?" "I want to walk it myself first," she said. "You give me the rundown while we walk." They moved along the ridgeline in the dark, Kale talking steadily, Elena listening with complete attention, while simultaneously filing the information against what she was observing directly. A good NCO brief was only as useful as the gap between what was said and what was visible, and that gap told you everything you needed to know about what problems were being underestimated. "Perimeter is set in 3 positions," KL said. "Alpha team on the north end, 4 soldiers, the M240, is there like they told you. Bravo team covering the east approach corridor, 5 soldiers, including Webb's designated marksman slot, which I'll adjust now that he's here. Charlie team on the south end, 4 soldiers. They're the lightest position, and they know it. I've got 2 soldiers running the communication post and 2 more who are currently distributing ammunition, which you're going to want to hear about. Tell me." "We have enough for 1 sustained engagement," Kale said flatly. "1. If they hit us again after that, we're in trouble." Elena stopped walking. "1 sustained engagement, meaning 1 full assault wave." "Correct." She stood still in the wind for a moment, looking out over the darkness below the ridge where the valley lay invisible under cloud cover. Somewhere down there, 400 soldiers were sleeping, checking their weapons, receiving final orders, preparing for dawn. She could feel the weight of that number the way a person sometimes felt the pressure of a storm before it arrived. Not with their eyes, but with something older and more fundamental. A recognition of force that bypassed rational thought and landed directly in the body. "Callan," she said. "Sergeant, every round counts twice when a sniper is choosing targets. You understand what I mean by that?" He was quiet for a moment. "You're not talking about ammunition. I'm talking about who I shoot first. If I take out their command and control in the first 60 seconds, every soldier in that wave loses confidence simultaneously. It doesn't stop them, but it slows them, and slow is what buys us time." She paused. "It also means I need to be mobile. I can't be fixed at one position. If I stay in one location, they'll bracket me within the first 10 minutes. Where will you be?" "Everywhere," she said simply, "and nowhere long enough to get killed." She started walking again. Kael fell into step beside her. He was quiet for a moment, and she recognized the quality of the silence. It was the silence of someone reforming an opinion. "Sergeant," he said finally, "I want to be straight with you about something." "Go ahead." "When they told us the senior NCO coming up for this position was a female sniper, there was some conversation among the men. Not hostile, just honest." "What kind of conversation?" "The kind where experienced soldiers who've seen a lot of bad plans implemented say things like, 'I hope she knows what she's getting us into.'" Elena nodded slowly. "That's a fair concern." "I told them to wait and form their own judgment." "Also fair." "I'm still waiting," he said, "but I'll tell you, moving that M240 position and what you just said about target selection, that's not the thinking of someone who doesn't know what she's doing." She looked at him sideways. "You're not wrong, Kale, but don't tell me yet. Tell me when it's over." He almost smiled. "Yes, Sergeant." They reached the south end of the ridge, and Elena stopped at the edge of the rise that looked down over the shale field. In the dark below, the rock formations were invisible, but she knew exactly where they were. She had memorized them 3 weeks ago, and memory like that didn't fade, especially when it was the kind of memory that a part of your brain categorized as survival relevant. She went still. Then she said quietly, "There's someone down there." Ko went rigid. "What?" "Below the lower shale field. Movement. Single person moving as slowly using the rock line as cover. About 400 meters. She didn't reach for her rifle yet. Too far forward to be a point element from the main force. Could be a scout." "How can you see that it's pitch dark?" "I'm not seeing it," she said. "I'm hearing it. Wind shifted 2 degrees east about 90 seconds ago. When wind drops in a mountain valley and then comes back slightly off axis, it means something disrupted the airflow at the valley floor. Something moving." Kale stared at her. "They sent a scout," she said, "which means they're not waiting until dawn. They're doing route reconnaissance right now." She turned and walked back toward the center of the ridge at a controlled, purposeful pace. "Wake everyone up," she said. "They're coming earlier than forecast." Kale was on his radio before she had taken 3 steps. At the communication post, a young private named Ferrara sat behind the radio unit with the wide-eyed alertness of someone who had already been awake for 20 hours and was running entirely on something chemical and involuntary. She looked up when Elena arrived, and Elena could see her trying to read the situation in Elena's face, the way junior soldiers always tried to read the situation in their senior NCO's face, searching for the thing that hadn't been said yet. Elena sat down across from her, placed her rifle across her knees, and began checking the chamber, with the methodical, unhurried precision she always brought to this action, regardless of what was happening around her. "What's your name?" Elena asked. "Private Ferrara, Sergeant. Lucia Ferrara." "How long have you been on the radio, Ferrara?" 6 hours. "You good at your job?" Ferrara blinking. Yes, Sergeant. I think so." "I need you to be better than good," Elena said. "I need you to be accurate. When I call a position adjustment on this radio, I need you to relay it to Kale within 4 seconds. Not 6, not 8, 4. Can you do that?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good." Elena looked up at her. "And Ferrara, when this starts, you're going to hear things that sound bad. Things that are going to make every instinct you have tell you to get small and go quiet and wait for someone to fix it. I need you to do the opposite of that. The moment things sound bad, that is when this radio becomes the most important piece of equipment on this ridge. Understand? Ferrara swallowed. Yes, Sergeant. The wounded in the hollow behind us, 63 of them. They are the reason every person on this ridge does their job without flinching. Not for orders, not for mission objectives. For them. Elena's voice was level matter of fact without any of the theatrical weight that lesser leaders sometimes apply to speeches like this, and perhaps because of that, because it sounded like a simple statement of fact rather than a rallying cry, it landed differently, more completely. Ferrara nodded, her jaw was set. Elena stood, slung her rifle, and began moving toward the south edge of the ridge. Somewhere below in the dark, in the valley in the cold, the scout was completing his rote reconnaissance and moving back to report what he had found. Elena knew what he would say. She had given him nothing to see, no light, no fire, no movement visible from the valley floor. The ridge would look minimally defended, which was accurate, but the scout would interpret that as an opportunity rather than a trap, because people nearly always saw what they expected to see. That was the first advantage. She found a natural depression in the rock near the south end of the ridge, a low shelf of granite that offered a prone firing position with a clear sight line over the upper shale field, while simultaneously putting the rock face at her back and her outline below the ridge crest invisible against the dark sky. She settled into it with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who had spent hundreds of hours in positions exactly like this one, letting her body mold to the ground, letting her breathing slow, letting her heart rate drop to the specific quiet calm that she had trained herself to reach and hold regardless of external circumstances. She checked her range cards, the mental map of distances she had built 3 weeks ago, and verified tonight with laser measurements at 4 key reference points. The scout's route had taken him through the lower shale field at a bearing of approximately 225 degrees. The main assault element, when it came, would follow a similar path because that was what assault elements did. They followed the route their scouts had cleared because it was human nature to trust the path someone had already walked. She knew where they would emerge from the tree line. She knew which formation they would use in the lower shale approach. She knew the first target she would engage, and the second, and the third. She also knew with a precision that was not optimistic, but simply accurate, that 19 soldiers holding a ridge against 400 was not a defensive problem. It was an arithmetic problem. And the only solution to an arithmetic problem with those inputs was to change the variables. She would not be defending a ridge. She would be dismantling an attack. The wind shifted again back to northwest, the forecast pattern reestablishing itself. She noted the correction, made a mental adjustment to her wind hold calculation, and settled deeper into the granite. Below the ridge in the valley that was invisible beneath its cover of darkened cloud, the assault force was waking up. She could feel it. Dawn was coming. And Elena Voss lay in the rock, and the cold with one heartbeat of patience between her and everything that was about to arrive, and she did not pray, and she did not rehearse fear, and she did not think about the 49 soldiers in the hollow who couldn't move, and the 19 on the line who were counting on one person to make math work that should not work. She simply breathed, and waited, and was ready. She heard them before she saw them. That was how it always worked, and at altitude in the dark, when the wind was doing what the wind at Karvash always did, carrying sound in directions that made no physical sense, folding it around rock faces, dropping it without warning, then throwing it back twice as loud. Elena had been lying in the granite depression for 41 minutes when the first noise came through that wasn't wind and wasn't the settling of frozen rock. It was the specific, muffled compression of a boot on shale that someone was trying very hard not to make. The trying was what gave it away. Soldiers moving naturally made irregular sounds. Soldiers trying to move silently made regular ones. She pressed her cheek against the stock and let her breathing fall to the pace she needed. Below her, the shale field was darkness inside darkness. But she knew its geography the way a person knows their own kitchen in a power outage, not by seeing it, but by having lived in it long enough that the layout existed in her body rather than her mind. The lower rock formation at 225 degrees. The narrow channel between the second and third outcropping where 2 men could walk abreast, but not 3. The flat shelf 20 meters above the tree line where an assault element would naturally pause to regroup before the final approach. She keyed her radio. 1 click. The signal she had established with Kai, meaning contact, confirmed standby. 2 clicks came back. Acknowledged. Then she waited. She waited because timing was not just a tactical advantage in sniper work, it was the entire foundation of everything. Fire too early and you reveal your position, for the element is committed to the approach, giving them the option to withdraw and regroup. Fire at the right moment and you catch them in the one configuration where their numbers become a liability rather than a strength, bunch-channeled, committed to forward movement, with no immediate cover and no clear picture of what is hitting them or from where. The first soldier emerged from the tree line at 5:47 in the morning, 17 minutes before official dawn. Then the second, the third. They were moving in a wedge formation which was disciplined, which told her these were not conscripts. These were trained infantry who had done this before. She counted silently as they cleared the tree line. 12, 18, 24. The formation spread as it entered the shale field, the outer elements moving wide to reduce the density of the central mass, which was exactly the correct response to terrain that funneled approach. Someone below had a competent tactical mind. She made a note of that and adjusted her priority target accordingly. 31, 38. The main element kept coming. She estimated 60 to 70 soldiers in the first wave, with more likely staged in the tree line as a follow-on element. The second push that would come the moment the first made contact, designed to exploit whatever gap the initial assault created. She found the man she wanted. He was moving at the center rear of the formation. Not the point that position was for expendable scouts. Not the far rear, which was support and reserve. Center rear was where a platoon commander positioned himself to maintain situational awareness of the whole element while staying close enough to the front to influence the action. He was wearing the same kit as the men around him, which was smart. Distinguishing command personnel was something well-trained units stopped doing after their first few encounters with effective snipers. But he was doing the one thing that command personnel almost never fully stopped doing. He was looking sideways. Not forward like the assault element, sideways, checking the flanks, monitoring the spread of his formation, which was the specific behavioral signature of a man responsible for the whole picture rather than just the piece in front of him. She settled the reticle, breathed out. The wind touched her left cheek at approximately 18 kilometers per hour. She held the correction without thinking about it, the way a pianist holds a chord, not by instruction, but by accumulated repetition until the action lived below the level of conscious decision. The shot broke at 5:51 a.m. The formation below her reacted the way formations always reacted to the first shot from an unseen position, imperfectly. 2 soldiers hit the ground immediately, which was training. 4 soldiers went to the nearest cover, which was also training. The remaining 30-plus froze for 1.8 seconds. She counted, which was fear overriding training. And that 1.8-second freeze was one of the most dangerous things that could happen to a moving assault element, because in 1.8 seconds, a disciplined sniper could fire twice more. She fired twice more. The first secondary shot took out the soldier she had identified as the assistant gunner for the machine gun team, the man carrying the ammunition load that fed the crew-served weapon that would have done the most damage to her defensive line. No assistant gunner meant the gun team's sustained fire rate dropped by 60%. The second secondary shot was aimed at the radio operator she had spotted by the antenna configuration on his pack, because cutting communication between the assault element and its command structure in the first 90 seconds created a confusion gap that even good soldiers couldn't fully compensate for. 3 shots, 11 seconds. Then she was moving. This was the part that most people who had never worked with snipers at this level failed to understand. The shooting was almost the smallest part of the job. The movement was everything. You fired from a position, and the moment that shot left the barrel, that position was already compromised, because muzzle flash sound and the simple logical calculation of where a shot at that angle could have come from were already narrowing the enemy's search cone to a manageable area. You had, in Elena's estimation, between 15 and 45 seconds before incoming fire would begin to bracket your last known location with enough accuracy to be dangerous. She used 12. She was 22 meters to the east and 6 meters lower in elevation before the first return fire began. Small arms disorganized, aimed at where she had been rather than where she was, which was exactly what she needed. Disorganized return fire meant the formation's attention was on self-protection rather than continued advance. The assault had fractured into its component parts, each part thinking about the immediate problem of the incoming rounds rather than the collective problem of the objective. From her new position, she keyed the radio twice. Cale's voice came through immediately. M240 is up. Bravo team is set. Your call. South slope, lower shale field, approximately 60 personnel. Follow-on element still in tree line. She said, her voice low and completely level. I've broken the command structure in the first element. They're going to reorganize within 4 minutes. When they start moving again, that gun needs to engage the channeled approach at the second outcropping. Not the scattered element, the channel. Force them back into the tree line. Copy. Webb. Webb's voice came on, here. You see the left flank element, the 6 soldiers who broke toward the rock face on the west side of the shale approach. I see them. They're going to try to use that rock face to bypass the M240's angle. When they commit to that movement, you engage. Don't wait for them to get into position and engage while they're moving. Understood. She moved again before she finished the transmission. At 5:58 a.m., the M2400 opened up. The sound of a sustained machine gun firing at altitude in the dark in winter was something that the human body registered not just as sound, but as physical pressure, a rhythmic percussive hammering that Elena felt in her sternum even from 200 meters away. She heard the change in the pattern below, immediately voices cutting off mid-shout, the specific mechanical cessation of forward movement that she could read in the sound profile of the enemy. Formation the way a conductor reads the sound of an orchestra. The first assault wave stopped. It didn't retreat. Not yet. Stopped. Which meant the soldiers below were still disciplined, still functional, still following whatever command structure had managed to reconstitute itself in the minutes since she had taken out their platoon leader. There was someone down there who was good, someone who had absorbed the shock of losing command personnel and kept the element coherent. She needed to find him. She was moving along the ridge crest in a low, fast crouch, covering ground at a pace that most soldiers couldn't maintain in combat boots on uneven rock in the dark, when Kael's voice came over the radio with a tension she had not yet heard from him. Voss, second element, they're moving. They didn't wait. She stopped. How many? Hard count looks like 50, maybe 60, moving faster than the first wave. They're not using the shale approach. They're hitting the east corridor. The east corridor, the approach she had identified as the primary channeling funnel, the one that offered the most direct line to the ridge crest and the least natural cover for a defender at long range, but which also committed an assault element to a single direction with no lateral movement option for the last 200 meters. They had split the attack deliberately. First wave on the south slope to establish contact and force her to commit her fire support. Second wave immediately behind, hitting a different approach to divide attention and force a choice. Reinforce the south, expose the east. Reinforce the east, leave the south unsupported. This was not 400 soldiers making a frontal push. This was a coordinated 2-axis assault executed with the kind of timing that required rehearsal. Kael, she said, already moving. M240 stays on the south slope. Do not redirect it. Bravo team pivots east, full defensive posture on the corridor approach. I'm moving to support. Copy. Voss Bravo team has 4 soldiers, 60 coming up the corridor. I know. She ran. Not the careful, weight-distributed movement she had been using. She ran full extension, crossing the ridge crest at a speed that she would have called reckless in any other context. Because the east corridor, if the second wave reached the upper portion uncontested, gave the enemy a position from which they could fire laterally across the ridgeline and unmask every defensive position simultaneously. Kael's 3 teams became exposed targets. The medical hollow became exposed. She reached the east end of the ridge at 6:04 a.m., breathing hard but controlled, and dropped into position behind a natural rock formation she had identified 3 weeks ago and had not until this moment needed. Below her 60 meters down the corridor approach, she could see the second wave. They were moving fast, too fast for careful approach, which meant their commander had made a bet that the defensive element on the ridge was too distracted by the south slope engagement to respond adequately to the corridor in time. It was a reasonable bet. Under normal circumstances, against a 19-person defensive force with 1 machine gun committed elsewhere, it was probably the correct bet. It did not account for 1 person in the right place at the right time. Elena fired. She fired 7 times in the next 40 seconds, working through the assault formation with a selection logic that was not random and not simply aimed at the most accessible targets. She was dismantling the formation structurally. First shot the point element, which stopped the formation's forward momentum by removing the lead. Second shot the far right flank soldier, which collapsed the formation's lateral spread and forced a bunching toward the center. Third shot, center mass of the newly bunched formation where the density was highest. Fourth and fifth shots, the two soldiers she identified as the likely sub-commanders based on their movement patterns. They were not the most exposed targets, but they were the organizational spine of the element, and without them, the remaining soldiers had no one to tell them what to do next. Sixth shot a soldier who was doing something specific that Elena had been watching since she took her position. He was carrying a different load than the assault element, heavier, more centralized, with the specific weight distribution of someone carrying demolition equipment. Breaching charges. They had sent a breach team with a second wave designed to blow through whatever obstacle they found at the top of the corridor. She had identified him fourth and waited to engage him last in this sequence, because the moment she shot the breach team member, the remaining soldiers in his immediate vicinity would understand exactly what that meant, that someone on the ridge had identified their capability and targeted it specifically. That level of precision would not be lost on them. It was not lost on them. The seventh shot she used on the radio man she spotted, making a transmission, likely coordinating with the first wave or calling the assault command for guidance. She cut it mid-transmission. Then she moved. Webb's voice came on the radio as she relocated. East corridor is stalling. They're pulling back to the lower approach. I count at least 8 down. They're dragging casualties. Let them pull back, Elena said. Don't pursue fire. The moment they're outside the corridor, they're not your problem. Copy, Reyes's voice from the medical hollow. Sergeant, I've got a situation back here. Elena's movement didn't slow. Talk to me. One of the ambulatory wounded specialist Carver, he grabbed a rifle from the weapons rack and he's trying to move to the ridgeline. He says he's not sitting here while the rest of us fight. Elena processed this while covering ground. Is he stable enough to hold a weapon effectively? He took a fragment to the left arm 3 days ago. Right arm is fine. He's furious, which seems to be compensating for most of the pain. Put him on the south perimeter of the hollow with a clear field of fire toward the lower shale approach. He does not advance. He holds that position and engages only if the hollow is directly threatened. Make that absolutely clear. And if he argues, tell him I said the hollow is its own defensive position and he's now responsible for it. Give him a jab. He'll stop arguing. A pause, then, that'll work. At 6:19 a.m., the south slope assault resumed. The first wave had not retreated into the tree line. They had reorganized, which was the thing Elena had been quietly waiting for and quietly dreading. The competent commander she had intuited earlier had managed to hold the element together through the initial shock, redistribute the disrupted formation, and establish a new command structure fast enough to restart the assault before the momentum fully died. That took real skill. That took the kind of NCO who had been in this situation before and knew that the only thing worse than a failed attack was a stalled attack. The M240 was still firing short, disciplined bursts that KL's gunner was managing with the careful ammunition conservation that Elena had specifically briefed. But the reorganized first wave was using a different approach. Now they were using their own casualties as momentary reference points, leapfrogging between positions of concealment, moving in 4 to 6 soldier groups, with one group suppressing while the other advanced. They were adapting. Elena felt something she almost never felt during a fight. It was not fear. She had long ago developed a relationship with fear that was more collegial than paralyzing an acknowledgement of its presence without any particular need to respond to it emotionally. What she felt was closer to respect. These soldiers below were getting shot at by a defensive element that had just demonstrated the capacity to engage 2 axes simultaneously, and they were adapting in real time. They were frightened, and they were adapting anyway. She didn't let that respect slow her trigger. She relocated to the south edge again, a 230-meter move across the ridge crest that she completed in under 3 minutes, and found the position she had mentally flagged the previous night, a long, low rock shelf with a sight line over the mid-shale field that gave her coverage of the leapfrog movement the reorganized wave was using. The thing about leapfrog advancement under fire was that its effectiveness depended entirely on the suppressing element doing its job while the advancing element moved. The suppressing element was by definition stationary. They were firing, not moving, which meant for the duration of their suppression the cycle, they were in a fixed position which made them exactly the kind of target she was designed to engage. She identified the suppression positions one by one and worked through them with the methodical patience of someone who was not rushing and was not panicked and was operating on the specific calm that comes not from indifference but from complete commitment to the task at hand. By 6:31 a.m., the leapfrog pattern had broken down. By 6:34 a.m., the first assault wave was pulling back to the tree line. Cale's voice. South slope is clearing. First wave retreating. A pause. Voss, I'm counting what we did up here and what I can see down there, and I don't how many positions have you fired from in the last 40 minutes. 6, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. They don't know where you are, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Stina. They think there are multiple snipers. Probably. She heard him exhale. The men on the line they're asking. They want to know how you're doing this. Elena was already moving to her next position. Tell them I'll explain later. Right now I need a full ammunition count from all 3 teams, and I need it in the next 3 minutes. The count came back at 6:38 a.m., and it was not good. It was not catastrophic, but it was not good. The M240 had consumed roughly 60% of its ammunition in 2 sustained engagements. Bravo team's designated marksman position had expended 40%. Alpha and Charlie teams were in better shape because their engagements had been shorter, but the overall picture was clear. They had enough for one more sustained fight at current consumption rates. Possibly 1.5 if the teams were exceptionally disciplined. 2 assault waves repelled. Ammunition for 1 more. Elena sat with that number for 30 seconds, not paralyzed by it, but sitting with it the way you sit with a problem that has no good solution and requires you to accept that fact before you can find the best available solution. She keyed the radio to FOB Carvash. The response came from Callaway, which was not what she wanted, but was what she had. Callaway, Eastern Ridge, we've repelled 2 assault waves. We need an immediate resupply drop, M240 ammunition priority followed by 7.62 for the DMR positions. Callaway's voice had the quality of a man delivering news he had already practiced and didn't want to give. Voss, I understand. I've been tracking your engagement. Command is aware of the ammunition situation. Weather is restricting all air movement in your sector. We cannot get a resupply to your position in the next, how long? Minimum 6 hours, possibly 12. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Copy, she said. Ridge holds. She clicked off before he could say anything else. Webb was beside her position now he had moved up during the pause in contact, which was exactly what she would have wanted him to do without needing to be told. 12 hours, he said. He had clearly been close enough to hear the transmission. Possibly. He looked out over the ridge. In the growing light, the shale field below was visible now, and the picture it showed was not subtle. The evidence of 2 assault waves was spread across it in ways that Elena had learned not to look at directly during an engagement, because the brain had a way of processing that kind of image that was not useful in the moment. We have enough ammunition for 1 more engagement at the rate we've been burning, Webb said. His voice was matter of fact, not panicked, not dramatic. He was doing the same math she was doing and arriving at the same answer and presenting it the same way she would as a fact that needed to be acknowledged before it could be addressed. Yes, she said, and you think there's a 3rd wave. There's definitely a 3rd wave, she said. There's probably a 4th. This is a coordinated offensive with a specific objective, the ridge, and the force committing to it is large enough that 2 failed assault waves don't exhaust their resources. They adjust, they wait, they come again. So what do we do with 1 engagement worth of ammunition against however many waves they have left? Elena looked out over the ridge, over the valley below, over the place where the tree line was dark and still, and gave nothing away about what was forming inside it. We make the 1 engagement count more than it should, she said. How? She turned and looked at him directly. Every shot I've fired today has been aimed at a specific person for a specific reason. Command personnel communications, weapons, capability, formation, structure. That's not marksmanship. That's surgery. You don't use surgery to kill a patient. You use it to change what the patient is capable of doing. She paused. When the 3rd wave comes, I'm not going to be shooting at soldiers. I'm going to be shooting at the idea that their commanders have of what this assault is supposed to look like. Every time a plan is disrupted at the command level, the soldiers executing it lose 10% of their effectiveness. You disrupt it enough times, the attack doesn't fail because you stopped it. It fails because it stops being an attack and starts being 400 confused individuals without a coherent plan. Webb was quiet for a moment. That's not a plan, he finally said. That's a philosophy. Most plans stop working the moment the enemy shows up, Elena said. Philosophies are harder to disrupt. He almost smiled, just for a second. Then the professional in him reasserted itself. What do you need from me? I need you to understand your two best firing positions from the east end of the ridge and be ready to move between them without instruction. I need you to engage only high-value targets, command communications weapons, and I need you to move after every 3 shots, not 4. 3. And if I miss, then take the 4th shot before you move, she said. But don't miss. He nodded once, picked up his rifle, and was gone. At 7:12 a.m., Ferrara's voice came through with a tightness that Elena recognized as controlled alarm, the specific vocal quality of someone who has been trained to deliver bad news calmly and is working very hard at it. Sergeant Voss, I'm receiving a transmission from the valley floor. Enemy frequency uncoded. Elena went very still. Enemy transmissions on uncoded frequencies were either mistakes or messages intended to be heard. Read it. Ferrara read it. The message was brief in a language Elena spoke well enough to not need translation. It was addressed to the commander of the Eastern Ridge defensive position, specifically to the sniper. It said, "We know you are alone. We know how many are with you. We are coming with enough that your ammunition will not matter. Surrender the ridge and the wounded will be evacuated safely. You have 20 minutes. Elena listened to the message once. Then she keyed the radio. Ferrara, Sergeant, transmit a response on the same frequency. A pause. What do you want me to say? Elena thought for exactly 3 seconds. Send this, thank you for the 20 minutes. She closed the channel and began moving toward her next position, because the message told her something critical that she had not previously known. With certainty they knew about the wounded. They knew the hollow existed and who was in it, which meant they had better intelligence on this position than a scout route could have provided, which meant either there was a longer surveillance operation preceding this assault than the 72-hour window command had reported, or someone had talked. Neither of those possibilities changed what she needed to do in the next 20 minutes, but they changed what happened after. She reached her 7th firing position of the morning, a deep crevice in the upper rock face that gave her a sight line to the east corridor, approach in a secondary angle toward the south slope, with a field of view she had not yet used, and settled into it with a deliberate, purposeful calm that was the only thing she could offer this ridge. Below in the valley, the tree line was still dark. The 20 minutes began, and Elena Voss lay in the rock and the cold and the growing light of the Karvash morning and counted every second of the time they had given her and used every one of them. The 20 minutes expired at 7:32 a.m., and the third wave did not announce itself with the kind of gradual building movement that the first 2 had used. It came all at once. Elena heard the mortars before she heard anything else. 3 distinct thump sounds from the valley floor separated by about 2 seconds each. And then the ridge shook. Not metaphorically, physically shook the rock under her hands, vibrating with a frequency she felt in her teeth and her sternum simultaneously. The first round hit 40 meters south of her position. The second hit closer. The third hit the north end of the ridge, and she heard Kael's voice cut through the radio immediately. Tight and fast. Mortar contact north end. Alpha team is intact. Repeat, Alpha team intact. Copy, she said. Stay low, the mortars are ranging. They're walking rounds onto the ridge to find the gun position. Move the M240 now, 20 meters west of current position. Moving. She was already out of the crevice and relocating because the mortar fire told her something critical. The third wave had fire support coordination. The first 2 assaults had been infantry-led with no indirect fire. This one had a fire control element in the valley with the specific capability to suppress her crew-served weapons while the assault element advanced. That was a fundamentally different problem than what she had been solving for the past 90 minutes. At 7:35 a.m., the assault element came up both approaches simultaneously. South slope and east corridor just like before, but this time with the mortar fire running ahead of them, each salvo advancing 20 to 30 meters up the approach before the infantry followed the impact line. It was a simple but effective technique. The mortars destroyed cover positions ahead of the assault and forced defenders to relocate, and relocating defenders could not simultaneously engage advancing infantry. Elena had 3 seconds to process this and make a decision that she understood would define the rest of the engagement. She keyed the radio. All teams, listen carefully. Do not hold fixed positions. The moment a mortar round lands within 50 meters of your location, you move. I don't care where you move. I don't care if you lose your sight line. You move and you engage from the new position. A moving target in the dark is worth more than a static defensive line that's getting shelled. Acknowledge. Kale copy. Webb copy. Ferrara from the hollow copy sergeant. She heard the strain in all 3 voices and noted it and set it aside because strain was information, but it was not the most urgent information right now. At 7:38 a.m., she was back at the south edge, and the 3rd wave on the south slope was already past the lower shell field. They had moved through it faster than either previous wave, because the mortar fire had already suppressed the midfield defensive angle, and the soldiers moving up knew they had a window. 70, maybe 80 soldiers on the south slope alone. She fired 3 times, moved, fired twice more from the new position, moved again. She was working the formation's flanks rather than its center now, because the center was dense and the mortar fire had already forced her to compromise her best center coverage positions. Working the flanks served a different purpose. It prevented the assault element from spreading laterally and flanking the ridge crest, which would expose the medical hollow's approach from the west. At 7:43 a.m., the mortar round landed close enough that she felt the concussive pressure as a physical blow against her left side. She was moving when it hit, which was the only reason she was still moving afterward. She went down on one knee, came back up in the same motion, kept going. Her left ear was ringing. She filed that away. Kale's voice on the radio, and for the first time she heard something in it that was beyond strain. It was the specific sound of a man reporting damage he had not expected to be reporting. Voss, Charlie team, 2 soldiers down shrapnel. They're alive. Minor trauma. But I've lost the south perimeter coverage. Charlie team is down to 2 effective personnel. Pull them back 15 meters and hold the secondary line, Elena said immediately. Do not try to hold the forward position with 2 people. That gives the assault element the upper shale field. I know. Let them have it. A pause. Say again. Let them have the upper shale field, Kale. If they're on the shale, they're still 200 meters from the ridge crest and they're exposed. I'll deal with what's on the shale. You protect the crest. She heard him breathe, then copy. She dealt with what was on the shale. She moved to the highest point of the south ridge, a position she had deliberately avoided using until now, because its elevation made her silhouette briefly visible against the sky during the approach, which was a risk she had been unwilling to accept until the situation required accepting it, and from that elevation she had a firing angle over the upper shale field that she had not been able to access from any other position. The soldiers who had advanced into the upper shale were moving with the confidence of men who believed they had broken the defensive line. They were not wrong to believe that. They had in fact broken the defensive line as it had been configured. What they had not accounted for was that the sniper who had been holding that line had redrawn it. She fired 9 times in 4 minutes from that position. By 7:51 a.m., the south slope assault had stalled again at the upper shale field. Not retreating, but stalled the formation, going flat against the rock and waiting for something to change. They had not broken, but they had stopped advancing. That was when the east corridor assault reached the upper approach. Webb's voice, Voss, they're at the upper corridor, 50 meters from the crest. I'm engaging, but there are too many for me to... A burst of fire, static. Then Webb again, breathing harder than before. Still here, relocated. They're still coming. Elena was already moving across the ridge crest at a dead run, the kind of all-out sprint she had not used yet, and had been conserving without consciously deciding to conserve it, her body making that calculation on its own, the way bodies did when they understood the situation better than the rational mind wanted to admit. She covered the distance in 40 seconds. She arrived at the east edge and came down hard into a prone position behind the rock formation Webb had vacated, and she looked down the corridor, and she understood immediately why Webb's voice had sounded the way it did. The East Corridor assault element was 50 soldiers deep, and they were moving in a configuration she had not seen either previous wave use. They were running, not advancing tactically, using cover and bounding movement. Running, full sprint up the last 50 meters of the corridor approach, accepting casualties, accepting exposure, betting everything on speed because whoever commanded this element had made the correct assessment that a sustained, careful approach up a defended corridor against a sniper with this level of capability was a losing proposition, and the only way to close the distance before getting dismantled was to close it faster than the sniper could respond. It was the right call. Elena had approximately 40 seconds before the lead elements reached the ridge crest. She fired without pause, without the deliberate breath and hold of precision work. At this range and this speed, she was not doing precision work. She was doing volume work with a precision instrument, which was a different skill entirely, and one she would later acknowledge less comfortable with, not less capable, but less comfortable, because it required a different relationship with the trigger than the one she had spent years developing. 8 shots, 12 seconds. She was counting the remaining rounds in the magazine with the part of her mind that did that automatically. The lead element reached 40 meters from the crest. She fired 4 more times, and then the magazine was empty, and she was moving, rolling right, putting the rock formation between herself and the approaching soldiers and pulling the spare magazine from her chest rig with hands that were cold and moving correctly anyway. The magazine seated. She was back up. 30 meters, 3 more shots. The angle was almost vertical now. She was firing almost straight down the corridor, which changed the geometry of the problem in ways that she had to adjust for without having time to think about adjusting for them. 20 meters. KL, East Crest, now. Kyle and 2 soldiers from Alpha Team arrived at the East Crest at roughly the same moment the first enemy soldiers did, and what followed was the kind of close-quarters chaos that Elena had been working to prevent from the first shot of the morning, because close quarters was where numbers mattered most, and she had the wrong numbers. It lasted 4 minutes. She was inside that 4 minutes with a sidearm and a combat knife, and the specific violent efficiency of someone who had to train for this situation while simultaneously never wanting to use that training. She engaged 3 soldiers. She did not stop to assess the results of what she was doing because assessment required time that the situation did not allow. When it was over, the East Crest was still in friendly hands. Alpha Team had 1 soldier down. Kale was holding pressure on the man's leg with both hands and looking at Elena with an expression she had never seen on his face before, which was the expression of a man who had just watched something that had permanently rearranged his understanding of what one person could do. Medical, Elena said already on the radio to Reyes. Reyes came up to the crest in 3 minutes with a trauma kit and worked on the downed soldier with the focused silence of a professional. Elena stood over them both with her rifle up, watching the corridor below, which was quiet now the assault element had broken when the crest engagement went against them. Quiet, but not gone. At 8:17 a.m., Ferrara's voice came through the radio with something Elena had not heard from her before, fear that was breaking through the professional composure she had been maintaining. Sergeant, I have a report from Specialist Carver at the hollow perimeter. He's reporting movement. West approach below the hollow. He says it's not soldiers. He says it's a drone. Multiple drones. Elena went still. How many? He counts 5. Moving slow, low altitude. Reconnaissance drones meant target acquisition. Target acquisition meant the enemy's fire control element now had eyes on the hollow on the 63 wounded personnel inside it, and that the mortar teams below could be retasked from ridge suppression to hollow destruction within the next 3 minutes. This was the twist she had not planned for. She had planned for infantry assaults, for indirect fire on the ridgeline, for ammunition exhaustion, for the possibility of a breach team. She had not planned for the possibility that the enemy's next move would bypass the ridge entirely and go directly for the hollow because targeting a medical position held consequences that she had assumed would deter it. She had been wrong about what they would deter. Ferrara, get on the FOB frequency. Tell Callaway we have drone-directed fire control developing against the medical hollow. Tell him we need air support, QRF anything. Tell him we need it in the next 10 minutes or the hollow is gone. Copy. A pause, then, Sergeant, I already transmitted that 4 minutes ago when Carver first reported. Callaway's response was, he said air is still grounded. QRF cannot reach the position in under 2 hours. Elena absorbed this. What about the Western Pass Drast's main defensive line? Drast's position is under pressure from a secondary enemy push. He cannot release forces. She stood at the east crest in the growing cold of the Karvash morning with a wounded soldier on the ground behind her and a medic working over him and 4 functional soldiers spread across a ridge that was now under threat from an axis she had not adequately weighted. And she understood that the situation had crossed from difficult to potentially unrecoverable. She keyed the radio to FOB Karvash, not to Callaway. She dialed through to Drast directly. Drast. A pause. Then his voice, and even through the radio, she could hear the background noise of his own engagement and weapons fire voices, the specific controlled chaos of a position under active pressure. Voss, I'm told you've repelled 2 waves. 3, she said. Sir, I need to know something directly. Go ahead. The wounded in the hollow. When I was briefed, I was told extraction in 36 hours. You told me delay was the mission delay until the hollow could be evacuated. I need you to tell me that's still the plan, that 36 hours is still real. A pause that was 2 seconds too long. Voss, sir, the extraction window has moved. Weather and operational priorities both. We're looking at closer to 56 hours for a full extraction. We're working to compress that, but that's the honest picture. 56 hours. She had ammunition for 1 more engagement. She was 32 hours short of the window she had been defending toward. Copy, she said. Voss, I need to ask you something directly as well. Sir, can you hold? The honest answer was that she did not know. The honest answer was that the situation had just fundamentally changed, and she needed 4 minutes to recalculate what holding even looked like under the new parameters. The honest answer was that she had been awake for over 20 hours, that her left ear had been ringing since the mortar blast that she had just come through. 4 minutes of close quarters fighting, that her body was going to bill her for later, and that the ammunition situation was now critical in a way that no amount of precision shooting could fully compensate for. She said yes. Then she closed the channel before he could ask a follow-up question because follow-up questions required answers she didn't have yet. Kyle was watching her. His hands were still pressed against the wounded soldier's leg, but the bleeding had slowed and Reyes had taken over. So Kyle was watching Elena with the focused attention of a man who had decided sometime in the last hour that this person was worth watching carefully. How bad, he said quietly. 56 hours to extraction. We have ammunition for 1 more sustained engagement. He was quiet for a long moment. What do you need, he said. She appreciated deeply and specifically that he did not say anything else. He did not say that it was impossible. He did not say that command had failed them. He did not ask whether they should signal surrender or request evacuation for the personnel who were still mobile. He asked what she needed. Full ammunition redistribution, she said. Everything gets pooled and reallocated by priority. M240 gets the largest share not because it's the most effective weapon here, but because its sound has a psychological effect on the assault element that individual fire doesn't. Second priority, Webb in my position. Third, everything else. No one fires unless they have a confirmed high-value target or the hollow is being directly threatened. And the drones? Carver, she said immediately. Where is he positioned at the hollow perimeter? Ferrara answered from the hollow west side sergeant. He's in a low position behind the supply crates. Carver, Elena said directly into the radio. Can you hear me? Carver's voice was rough and immediate, the voice of a man running on anger and determination, and the specific stubborn refusal to be a casualty in more ways than one. Here, Sergeant. Those drones are not armed. They are reconnaissance. Their job is to mark positions for the mortar teams below. If those mortars acquire the hollow, we lose everyone inside it. You understand? I understand. I need you to engage those drones. Every round you fire at them is a round you're not spending on infantry, so I need you to be efficient. They're low and slow. Shoot them like you'd shoot a bird, lead the movement, aim ahead of the body. A pause. I'm a rifleman sergeant, not a bird hunter. Then it's time to learn. Engage. 2 minutes later, she heard the first shot from the hollow perimeter, then 3 more in rapid succession, then Carver's voice. Got 1, 4 remaining. Keep going. She turned back to the ridge. At 8:44 a.m., the mortar fire resumed, but it was different now. No longer walking methodically up the approach paths. It was ranging shots probing in different directions, which told her the fire control element below had lost its drone feed and was working blind again. The shots were still dangerous. A ranging shot that happened to land in the right place was still lethal, but they were no longer coordinated suppression. They were harassment. Carver had bought time. She made a note to tell him that when this was over. At 9:02 a.m., the radio crackled with a transmission she had not expected and could not have predicted. It was Webb's voice, but not Webb's tone. Webb's tone until this point had been controlled professional, the voice of a designated marksman doing his job. This was different. This was the voice of a man reporting something that had changed the situation in a way he was still processing. Voss, East Corridor. I've got personnel coming up the corridor, but they are not in assault formation. They're moving slow. They're carrying something. What are they carrying? I think it's a white flag and something else. A stretcher. They've got a soldier on a stretcher. Elena's entire body went still. Hold fire, she said immediately. All teams hold fire. She moved to the east crest and looked down the corridor. Webb was correct. 6 enemy soldiers were moving up the east corridor at a walking pace, 2 of them carrying a stretcher between them, a third holding what was clearly a white cloth above his head. They were not armed, at least not visibly, which was not the same thing as not armed, but the configuration was consistent with a genuine parley approach rather than a concealed assault. The soldier on the stretcher was wearing partial American uniform markings. Elena's jaw tightened. Webb, she said quietly. The soldier on the stretcher. Do you have a clear look? Yes. Uniform markings. U.S. Army, sergeant's rank. I can't make the face from here. She processed this for 3 seconds. A captured American soldier presented under a flag of parley meant one of 2 things, a genuine attempt at negotiation or the most calculated form of psychological pressure she had encountered today, using a prisoner to create a hesitation window in her decision-making that the assault element could exploit. Both were possible. She had to proceed as if both were simultaneously true. Hold fire, she repeated, but everyone maintains position. Nobody relaxes. This is not over. She stood at the east crest and watched the 6 soldiers approach, and she felt for the first time since the morning began the specific weight of a decision that had no clean edges. Everything until now had been complex but ultimately clear. Defend the ridge, protect the hollow, preserve the force. This was something different. This was the kind of moment that required her to hold multiple truths in the same hand at the same time and still make a decision. The soldier on the stretcher was alive. She could see movement. The assault element below was not retreating. She had not heard the sounds of a large force standing down. She had heard the sounds of a large force pausing. Ferrara, she said, transmit on the valley frequency. Tell them I will speak with their representative at the east crest. Tell them any approach by anyone other than the 6 currently visible will be treated as hostile action. Ferrara transmitted. The response came back in 30 seconds agreed. The 6 soldiers reached the upper corridor, and Elena met them at the crest with her rifle at a ready position that she did not lower because lowering it would have been a courtesy she was not in a position to extend, and that any competent soldier on the other side would understand. The man holding the white cloth was an officer. She could tell by the way he held himself, by the specific kind of authority that some people carried in their posture, regardless of what rank markings were or weren't visible. He was about 40, weathered with the eyes of someone who had been in this business long enough that he had stopped expecting it to be clean. He looked at her with something she had not expected: recognition. Not personal recognition. The recognition of a professional who had spent the morning trying to take a position and had been stopped repeatedly by someone he could not see, and had spent the last 3 hours calculating who and what that person was, and was now standing in front of the answer. One person, he said in accented but clear English. All morning, one person. Elena said nothing. We thought it was 8 snipers minimum. We thought the defensive element was 30-40 soldiers. He paused. It was you. Still nothing from her. He glanced at the soldier on the stretcher. This man was recovered from a patrol engagement 2 days ago. He is your soldier. We are returning him. He paused. He is stable. He needs surgery that we cannot provide in the field. We are returning him because it is the right thing to do and because he stopped. And something crossed his face that was not sentiment, but was the closest thing to it that she had seen from anyone on the other side today. Because the person who held this ridge this morning deserves to have her soldier back. Elena looked at the man on the stretcher. He was conscious, barely his face pale, and his eyes focused on her with the specific, desperate relief of someone who had been afraid he would not see a friendly face again. She looked back at the officer. "Tell me what you want," she said. "We want the ridge," he said. "We have always wanted the ridge. That has not changed, but we are willing to give you until nightfall to evacuate the wounded. Full ceasefire both sides until sundown. You evacuate. We take the ridge. No more fighting today." She felt the weight of it. 63 wounded. A 56-hour extraction window that had just been handed a potential shortcut. The lives of 19 soldiers who had done everything asked of them and more. The end of a fight that by every rational measure had been decided against her from the moment she got her briefing. She looked at the officer. "My orders," she said slowly, "are to hold this ridge until extraction. I don't have the authority to negotiate its surrender." "Then get that authority." "I will contact my command," she said. "I will relay your offer exactly as stated. Whatever they decide, I will implement. But I need 1 hour." He studied her. 1 hour. 1 hour. He nodded once. The 6 soldiers began moving back down the corridor. Elena turned away from the crest and walked back toward the communication post, and the moment she was out of sight of the corridor, she stopped walking. Just stopped. Stood in the cold wind on the Karvash Ridge with her rifle across her body and her hands completely still, and let herself have exactly 15 seconds of the weight of the morning. Not feeling sorry for herself, not doubting any decision she had made, just acknowledging the weight, the way you had to acknowledge it or it would find a way to announce itself at a moment you couldn't afford. 15 seconds. Then she keyed the radio to Drast. She relayed the offer, exactly as stated. Drast listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Voss, what's your recommendation?" She had not expected him to ask. She thought about the 63 in the hollow, the 19 on the line, the ammunition count, the 56-hour window, and what it meant in real terms for personnel who could not move. She thought about the officer at the crest and the man on the stretcher, and the way a professional enemy had looked at her when he finally understood what had held his 400-soldier assault for an entire morning. "My recommendation," she said quietly, "is that we do not surrender this ridge." Silence on the line. "My recommendation is that the ceasefire offer is accepted for the purpose of evacuating critical casualties, only the 49 who cannot move. We use the hour and whatever they'll give us after to get helicopters in for the non-ambulatory. The ambulatory wounded my 19 soldiers, and I hold the ridge until the extraction is complete." "Voss, that's still 30-plus hours after the 1-hour window closes." "Yes, sir. They will not honor a ceasefire for 30 hours. "No, sir. They will not." A pause so long she thought the connection had dropped. Then Drast said, "I'm going to get you helicopters, every one I can find. Give me the hour." She closed the channel. Reyes was beside her. She didn't know when Reyes had arrived, but medics had a way of appearing at the moments they were needed that Elena had stopped questioning years ago. "You heard," Elena said. "Most of it," Reyes said. "The 49 go. We stay." "Yes." Reyes looked at her for a long moment. "Sergeant, your shoulder." Elena glanced down. The left side of her jacket was dark in a way that she had registered several engagements ago and then filed under information to be addressed later. The shrapnel from the mortar blast? She had forgotten about it with a completeness that she recognized as the specific mercy the body offered in high-stress situations, the delay of pain until the moment it could be afforded. Apparently the moment had arrived. "Later," she said, "it needs to be packed now or you'll lose more blood than you can afford to lose before tonight." The word tonight landed with a specific gravity, because tonight was when the 4th wave would come. Tonight was when she would be fighting in the dark with reduced ammunition and a shoulder that was not going to be functional at full capacity regardless of what Reyes did in the next 10 minutes. Tonight was when whoever was below this ridge would send everything they had left and trust that a defensive force that had already survived 3 waves could not survive a 4th. She sat down on the rock and let Reyes work. She did not make a sound. She looked out over the ridge that was still hers against every reasonable prediction, against every arithmetic that had been applied to the situation from the moment Drast had briefed her in that small room at 0400, and she thought about the 49 people who were going to get out today. Not because command had planned it, not because the weather had cooperated, not because the tactical situation had resolved cleanly, because an assault force of 400 had been stopped long enough for the possibility to exist. She thought about that. Then she checked her ammunition. Then she began planning for tonight. The helicopters came at 2:14 p.m., three of them threading through the cloud ceiling at an angle that the pilots would later describe in their after-action reports as inadvisable under normal circumstances, which was the military's particular way of saying they had done something that common sense argued against because the situation demanded it anyway. Drost had found them somewhere. Elena never learned the full story of what favors were called in or what operational priorities were reshuffled to make it happen, but they came and that was what mattered. The ceasefire held during the extraction. The enemy officer had given his word and he kept it, which Elena noted and filed away as information about the man she was going to be fighting again in a few hours. People who kept their word under pressure told you something important about how they operated. It didn't make them less dangerous. It made them more predictable in the specific way that honorable opponents were predictable, and predictable was something she could work with. 49 non-ambulatory wounded loaded across 3 helicopters in 41 minutes. Reyes coordinated the movement from the hollow with the focused, controlled efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this scenario in her head 100 times since morning, even though no one had told her to. The 14 ambulatory wounded stayed. Carver stayed. He had shot down 4 of the 5 reconnaissance drones, and was not he, informed Reyes with considerable firmness, leaving until the person who gave him that order left first. Elena watched the last helicopter lift from the hollow clearing at 2:55 p.m. and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't fully realized was clenched. 49 people were going to live who might not have. She had approximately 3 hours before dark. She used all of them. The first hour went to ammunition accounting and a position redesign. With the hollow cleared of non-ambulatory personnel, she could collapse the defensive perimeter inward, shortening the line her 19 soldiers now reduced to 16 effective after casualties had to cover. A shorter line meant denser coverage, which partially compensated for the ammunition deficit. She pulled Charlie Team entirely from the south perimeter and folded them into a central reserve position that could reinforce either the east corridor or the south slope within 90 seconds. She repositioned the M240 for the third time this time to a central elevated point that gave it a firing arc covering both approaches, sacrificing depth of coverage for breadth. She briefed every soldier personally, not as a group individually, face-to-face 30 seconds each, telling them exactly what their job was tonight and exactly why it mattered. She had learned years ago that soldiers fighting for an abstract objective performed at 80% of their capability. Soldiers fighting for a specific concrete reason performed at something closer to 110. She gave each of them the concrete reason. The 14 ambulatory wounded still in the hollow who could not be evacuated until morning at the earliest. That was who they were holding the line for. Not the mission, not the ridge. Those 14 people. She watched each soldier's face as she said it. She saw the shift happen. She moved on. The second hour she spent with Webb walking every firing position on the ridge and establishing a shared mental map of the night's geometry. Webb had evolved over the course of the day in a way she had been quietly tracking the man who had arrived on the truck that morning with good instincts and a willingness to argue, had become through 12 hours of the most concentrated tactical education available, something considerably more dangerous. He anticipated her now. She would begin describing a position and he would finish the thought. She would identify a problem and he would already be working the solution. They're going to use the flamethrowers, she told him at 4:30 p.m. He looked at her. The first 2 waves were probing. The third was pressure with fire support. The fourth wave at night with flamethrowers and specialized assault units is annihilation strategy. They're not trying to take the ridge anymore. They're trying to erase it. Erase every position, every person, every piece of evidence that this defense happened. Why, Webb said. Why does it matter to them at this point? Because we held, Elena said simply. 3 waves, 1 defensive element. If that story gets out, if their command has to explain to anyone above them why a position this size stopped 400 soldiers for an entire day, the answer reflects badly on everyone involved. The easiest solution is to make sure there's no position left to tell the story. Webb absorbed this. So they're not coming for the ridge tonight. They're coming for us. He was quiet for a moment. The wind off the glacier moved between them. Then we don't let them find us, he said. No, she agreed. We don't. The third hour Elena spent alone at the south edge of the ridge, lying in the rock, with her shoulder throbbing in the specific deep way that Reyes's packing had reduced from acute to chronic, but had not eliminated. She was thinking, not reviewing tactical decisions or running ammunition calculations. She had done all of that, and the numbers were what they were, and no amount of additional review changed them. She was thinking about the night itself, about darkness and sound, and the way the Karvesh Range behaved after sundown, when the temperature dropped hard, and the wind behavior shifted from the daytime patterns she had calibrated against all morning. She was also thinking about something Cale had said during the ammunition redistribution, said quietly almost to himself while counting rounds with the methodical focus of a man who needed to do something with his hands. You know what the strangest part of today has been? She had waited. Every time it got to the point where I thought, okay, this is where it falls apart. This is the moment you were already somewhere else, already doing something, like you never had a moment where you didn't know what to do next. She had thought about how to answer that. I always know what to do next, she had said finally. Sometimes what I know to do next is terrible, but I always know. He had nodded slowly like that made sense and also cost him something to accept. She thought about that now in the last of the daylight. She thought about what it meant to always know what to do next, when the options had been reduced to the point where knowing didn't feel like clarity anymore. It felt like the specific narrow path through a problem that had no good solutions, only least bad ones. The sun went behind the western peaks at 5:47 p.m. The temperature dropped 6 degrees in 20 minutes. And at 6:33 p.m. the fourth wave began. She heard them before she saw them, which was, she recognized with a grim private note, exactly how she had described the enemy's first approach 14 hours ago. Except this time the sounds were different. Not the careful, compressed, boot-on shale of soldiers trying to move quietly. These were mechanical sounds. The low rolling thrum of drone motors, not the small reconnaissance drones Carver had engaged, but larger, heavier platforms. And underneath that, the specific hiss and roar ignition sound of flamethrower equipment being activated at the base of the slope. She keyed the radio, her voice was completely level. All teams, they're coming. Remember your assignments. Remember who's in the hollow. Stay mobile. KO copy. Webb ready. Ferrara from the hollow, copy Sergeant. Carver says he's ready. A voice she hadn't expected, one of the ambulatory wounded, a corporal named Asha Bren, who had 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder that Reyes had roughly reset that morning. Ready, Sergeant? Elena paused for half a second. Bren, you're supposed to be resting. Respectfully, Sergeant, I'll rest when you do. She let it go. Hold your position at the hollow perimeter. Engage only if they breach the hollow approach, not before Bandaho. Copy. The first drone came over the South Ridge crest at 6:41 p.m., and it was not a reconnaissance platform. It was carrying an incendiary payload, which it released over the position where the M240 had been staged for the majority of the day. The position was empty. Elena had moved the gun team 40 minutes before dark, but the incendiary landed and burned hot and bright and illuminated the South Ridge crest in a way that was tactically significant. It told the assault element below exactly where the defensive positions had been, which also told them, if they were paying attention, that the positions had been moved. The element below was paying attention. They came up the south slope in the east quarter simultaneously again. But with a difference, the drones ran ahead of them, not as reconnaissance, but as forward clearance, deploying light incendiary payloads on positions where the thermal imaging aboard them suggested human presence. The technique was sophisticated. It was also, Elena recognized immediately, beatable, but only if the soldiers on the ridge kept moving fast enough that the thermal signature never had time to establish a fixed location. She got on the radio. Everyone move. Continuous movement. Do not stay in any position longer than 90 seconds, regardless of whether you're engaged. The drones are hunting heat signatures. Give them moving targets. She heard KO relay it to his teams. She was already moving herself, working the South Ridge at a pace that was close to reckless. given the darkness and the terrain, using the ridge geography she had memorized with a completeness that allowed her to move by memory rather than by sight. She fired from 3 different positions in the first 8 minutes, each shot aimed not at the assault element's mass, but at the drone operator she had identified as moving with the element, the soldiers carrying the control units for the aerial platforms, because without operator control, the drones defaulted to pre-programmed patrol patterns that were predictable and avoidable. First drone operator down at 6:49 p.m. One drone began flying in expanding circles uncontrolled. Second operator down on at 6:54 p.m. Another drone dropped altitude and hovered confused. The flamethrower teams were the problem she had not yet solved. They reached the upper shale field at 7:02 p.m. 2 teams of 3 soldiers each, and the effect on the ridge's defensive cohesion was immediate and visceral, in a way that she had anticipated intellectually, but that still landed harder than the intellectual preparation had suggested. Flamethrowers changed the psychological calculus of combat in a specific way that conventional weapons did not. They created fear that was qualitatively different from the fear of being shot. Older and more fundamental and even well-trained soldiers responded to it with a fraction of a second of hesitation that they did not respond to rifle fire with. She heard it in her soldiers' voices on the radio. Not panic, they were past panic at this point, 14 hours into an engagement that had burned through most of their available panic hours ago. But hesitation, a tightening. She had to take the flamethrower teams out fast before that hesitation compounded. She moved to the south crest at a dead run, dropped prone, found the first team at 60 meters through the thermal monocular she had been conserving since morning, and fired twice. The first shot was perfect. The second shot hit the fuel tank on the operator's back rather than the operator himself, which was not what she had intended, but produced a result that immediately and completely ended that team's operational capability. The explosion lit the south slope. In that light, suddenly and briefly, she could see the full scope of the assault element on the south approach. She had been engaging in the dark working off sound and thermal imagery and her knowledge of the terrain geometry with only fragmentary information about the size of the force she was facing. Now for 4 seconds she could see it clearly. There were more than she had calculated. Not 60 or 80, more than 100 spread across the south slope in a dispersed formation that was specifically designed to prevent her from achieving the kind of mass effect engagements she had been using all day. They had adapted to her. They had watched how she fought for 14 hours, and they had adjusted their formation to minimize what she was best at. The light died. Darkness again, and Elena lay in the rock for 3 seconds, processing what she had seen, making rapid revisions to every assumption she had been operating on for the last 30 minutes. They had not come with everything tonight. They had come with everything and more. Cale's voice strained past the point of concealing it. Voss, North End. I've got a third element. They're coming up the ravine. The North Ravine. I thought it was impassable in winter. It is impassable, she said immediately, and then stopped. Because it was impassable for conventional assault. It was not impassable for specialized mountaineering units who had spent the day while 3 assault waves kept her attention on the south slope, an east quarter rigging, an ascent route up the north face that nobody had been watching because nobody had believed it was possible. The twist arrived with the cold certainty of something she should have seen coming and had not. How many? She said. I count 15, maybe 20. Moving fast. They have ropes and climbing equipment. They're already at the upper third of the ravine. 15 to 20 specialized assault personnel coming up an approach she had no coverage on, while 100+ soldiers pressed the south slope and east corridor simultaneously, while flamethrower teams worked the mid-ridge while drones hunted heat signatures. She had been outmaneuvered. She understood it with a clarity that was not self-recrimination, but simple direct recognition of fact. The enemy commander, the same mind she had been respecting since 6 a.m. for the quality of his tactical decisions, had spent the day studying her, had noted every position she had fired from every movement, pattern, every decision, had used the third wave ceasefire hour not just for negotiation, but for detailed observation of how she defended, and had built the night's assault specifically around what she was least capable of countering simultaneously. She had 7 minutes before the North Ravine element reached the ridge crest. Webb, she said, here, I need you on the north end, everything you have. That ravine element cannot reach the crest. That's 30 meters of crest with no cover and 20 incoming specialists. I know. Voss, I know Webb. Go. A pause. 1 second. Then going. She heard him moving through the dark, the sound of boots on rock, fast and purposeful. She felt something she didn't have time to name and set it aside. She turned back to the south slope and did the only thing available to her. She made the south slope so costly, so loud, so continuously disrupted that the assault element could not coordinate the timing of its push with the ravine element's arrival. If both arrived at the ridge crest at the same moment, the defense collapsed. If she could stagger them, force the south slope element to go to ground, create a gap in the coordination, Webb would have time to deal with the ravine climbers before the south slope element got there. She fired constantly for 11 minutes. She moved every 60 seconds. She changed elevation. She changed angle. She fired from positions she would have called exposed in daylight and was gambling were survivable in darkness. The south slope assault went to ground twice in those 11 minutes. Twice the forward momentum broke under the volume of precise fire coming from multiple angles from a defensive element that seemed to the soldiers below to be everywhere on the ridge simultaneously, from a single person moving very fast in the dark. At 7:23 p.m., Webb's voice came through the radio, and the quality of it made her stop moving for 1 full second. Voss, crest. They're at the crest. She heard weapons fire. Close. Very close. The specific sharp sounds of a close-range engagement that was not the careful, distanced work of designated marksmanship. It was the ugly, immediate violence of people fighting within arm's reach of each other in the dark. She ran. She ran across the ridge in full darkness, covering 340 meters of uneven rock terrain that she could not see, running entirely on memory and the specific body-level geography she had built over 14 hours of moving across this ground. She fell, once went down hard on her right knee, felt the impact through her whole skeleton, came back up in 2 seconds, and kept running. She arrived at the north crest at 7:26 p.m. Webb was still standing. There were 3 enemy soldiers between her and him, and 3 more on the ground, and Webb had blood on his face that was dark, and she couldn't tell in the dark if it was his or someone else's, and he was holding his rifle like a club rather than a firearm, which told her the situation had gone to a place that rifles were not designed for. She engaged the 3 standing soldiers in the next 12 seconds. Then it was quiet. Webb sat down on the rock. Not gracefully, he sat down the way a person sat down when their legs made a unilateral decision to stop holding them up. He put the rifle across his knees and breathed. "You okay?" she said. "Define okay," he said. "Can you fire?" He took 1 breath, 2, then he picked up the rifle and checked the action with hands that were not entirely steady, but were steady enough. "Yes." "Then you're okay." He almost laughed. "Almost." Kale's voice. "North ravine element is down. What's your status?" "Crest is holding," Elena said. "South slope. They've pulled back to the upper shale. They're not retreating, they're reorganizing." She looked at her watch. 7:31 p.m. They were reorganizing, and she had been awake for over 26 hours, and her shoulder was bleeding again through Reyes's packing, because the run across the ridge had opened something that the packing had been holding closed, and she had 37 rounds left in her primary ammunition load. 37 rounds. She sat with that number the way she had sat with the 56-hour extraction window, not in despair, but with direct, unflinching acknowledgement. 37 rounds against an assault element that was regrouping below the ridge with numbers she had not fully depleted. She keyed the radio to Drast. She did not expect what she got. Drast's voice was different than it had been during the day. Not panicked, Drast was not a man who panicked, but carrying the specific weight of someone who had been managing a larger situation than he had briefed her into. Voss, sit rep. 4 waves repelled. North ravine element neutralized. South slope element regrouping. My ammunition is critical. I need you to tell me the honest picture on QRF. A pause. QRF is moving, Brim, Drast said. They ran into a secondary engagement at the lower valley road. They're clear of it now. ETA to your position is... She heard him check something between 90 minutes and 2 hours. She closed her eyes, opened them. An extraction for the remaining wounded. First light. Helicopters are staged. The moment we have visibility, they move. First light was approximately 6 hours away. QRF in 90 minutes to 2 hours. 37 rounds between now and then. Copy, she said. Ridge holds. She stood up from the rock where she had sat for 30 seconds, and she began moving again, because movement was the only variable she still had full control over, and control over any variable was better than none. At 7:58 p.m., the South Slope element began its push. It was the fifth assault of the day she was counting now, without trying to the way you counted things when the number kept mattering, and it was different from everything before it. It was quiet, no shouted commands, no coordinated volleys. They were moving up the slope in absolute silence, dispersed so widely that there was no formation to disrupt, no command structure to decapitate, no communication nodes to eliminate. Just soldiers moving individually upward through the dark, each one finding their own path, each one accepting that they might be the one who got hit without warning and proceeding anyway. It was the most disciplined thing she had seen all day, and it was designed to be fought with volume, with the kind of interlocking defensive fire that her 19 reduced to 13 effective soldiers with their nearly depleted ammunition could not sustain. She made her decision in the time it took to draw one breath. All teams, she said into the radio, conserve. Hold fire until you have confirmed visual at 30 meters or less. I don't care what you hear. I don't care what you think you see. Confirmed visual 30 meters. Acknowledge. Acknowledgements came back. She heard the discipline in them, the understanding that she was asking them to hold their fire, while an unknown number of enemy soldiers moved silently toward them through the dark, and that this was not a comfortable request. She made it to her last pre-planned position, the 8th firing position she had identified on the first night walk with KL, the one she had been saving because its location gave her something none of the others did, a sightline that covered the approach to the medical hollow directly. The hollow where 14 wounded soldiers and 1 combat medic and 1 furious specialist carver were waiting. She lay down in the rock. The cold was absolute. Her shoulder had stopped hurting in the specific way that things stopped hurting when the body decided the pain information was no longer useful and shut the channel down. Her hands were functioning, her eyes were functional, her breathing was where it needed to be. She had 37 rounds. She heard the South Slope element moving. She could not see them. The night had closed down completely. No moonlight, heavy cloud cover, the kind of darkness that made her thermal monocular the difference between effective and helpless. She used it. She found them moving up the approach, not the main ridge crest, which they had apparently decided was too costly, but angling southwest toward the hollow approach. The thing she had been afraid of since the moment she saw the full scope of tonight's assault. They had realized sometime during the day that the ridge crest was not the decisive terrain. The hollow was. The 14 remaining wounded were. They were not trying to take the ridge anymore. They were going for the hollow. She counted the elements she could see moving toward the hollow approach. 15, 20, 25. She keyed the radio. Her voice was completely steady. Ferrara, Bren, Carver, listen to me. Do not engage until I tell you. I have the approach. Trust me. Carver's voice, copy. Ferrara, copy, Sergeant. Bren, quieter. We trust you. She settled the reticle on the lead element of the hollow approach. Breathed. The lead soldier was 40 meters from the hollow entrance. 30. She fired. She worked through the remaining ammunition with a specific, unhurried precision that people who had seen her fight all day would not have believed was possible at this hour in this condition, with this much riding on every round. She did not rush. She did not flinch. She placed each shot with the same care she had placed the first shot of the morning at 5:51 a.m., because the first shot and the last shot deserved the same attention. And because the people in the hollow behind her deserved the same level of commitment at the end as they had received at the beginning. 20 shots. 30. 35. The hollow approach assault stalled. 36. It stalled and began to fracture the soldiers in it, losing the coherence of their advance, as the precision of the incoming fire convinced them that the darkness was not providing the cover they had believed it was. 37. She fired the last round at 8:44 p.m. Then she lay in the rock with an empty rifle and the sound of a fractured assault below her and the darkness of the Karvash night above her, and she was absolutely still. KL's voice on the radio, quiet. Voss, what's your ammunition status? She answered him honestly. 0. Silence on the channel for a moment. Then Webb. Mine too. Last 3 rounds 20 minutes ago. Then the M240 gunner, a soldier named Patel who had barely spoken that all day. Gun is dry, Sergeant. One by one across the radio net, the reports came in. Every position, every weapon, all of them spent. The ridge was held by 19 soldiers, 13 effective with no ammunition in the dark against an assault element that had not fully broken. Cale said with the specific quiet of a man who had decided to say the true thing, even if it was the hard thing. Voss, what do we do now? She was already moving. Off her position onto the hollow approach, placing herself physically between the hollow entrance and the direction the assault element had been coming from. She reached the hollow entrance at 8:51 p.m., and Carver was there, and Ferrara and Bren, and she could see in their faces, even in the near-complete darkness, the question they were all asking without asking it. She answered it the only way she had left. She stood in the hollow entrance with an empty rifle and did not move, because retreat was not an option she was willing to take, because the math had always been wrong, and she had held the ridge anyway, because there were people behind her who had not come this far to be abandoned at the end. The assault element below did not know her rifle was empty. They knew the ridge had been held by a defensive force that had demonstrated across 5 assault waves in 14 hours the capacity to do things that defensive forces were not supposed to be able to do. They knew the sniper who had been dismantling their operations all day was still somewhere on this ridge. They did not know where. They did not know how many rounds remained. They stopped. Not retreating. Stopped. The radio crackled. Drast's voice, Voss, QRF is at the base of the ridge road. ETA, 12 minutes. She felt the air go out of her body, not dramatically, not collapsing, just the slow, complete release of a breath she had been holding since the last round left the chamber. 12 minutes. She keyed the radio. Copy. Hold approach to the hollow. QRF is coming up the road. She stood in the hollow entrance and she did not move for 12 minutes. And the assault element below, facing a defensive position that had refused to die all day in darkness, that gave them no information about what was or wasn't pointed at them, made the calculation that had been built into every engagement since 5:51 a.m. that the cost of closing the final distance was not something they could accurately predict. They did not advance. They were still there, still on the slope, still a threat when the QRF vehicles reached the base of the ridge road and the sound of their engines began climbing through the dark. It was not until she heard those engines, until the sound of reinforcement became real, and not just a voice on a radio, that Elena Voss allowed herself to feel the weight of the day settle into her body all at once. The shoulder, the knee from the fall, the 26 hours without sleep, the cold that had moved past discomfort into the deep cellular cold that needed heat and rest and time to undo. She felt all of it standing in the entrance to a hollow that still had 14 people alive inside it. She had nothing left. She had used everything every round, every position, every decision, every ounce of the precise, relentless capability that she had spent years building, and it had been exactly enough. Not more than enough. Not with room to spare. Exactly enough. And in the dark on the ridge, with the engines of the QRF vehicles growing louder on the road below, and Carver standing a few feet away with an expression that had moved past exhaustion into something he didn't have a word for, she stayed on her feet. Because she was still the senior NCO on this ridge, and the ridge was still hers. The QRF vehicles reached the ridge road at 9:03 p.m., and the sound of their engines was the most specific relief Elena had ever experienced. Not joy, not euphoria, but the precise bone-deep release of a weight that had been carried so long, the body had stopped registering it as weight and had simply restructured itself around it. She did not go to meet them. She stayed at the hollow entrance until the first QRF soldiers crested the ridge road, on foot, 12 of them, moving fast and tactical, led by a lieutenant named Osi, who took one look at the defensive line and then one look at Elena, and then said nothing for a full 3 seconds, which was its own kind of statement. Sergeant Voss, he said finally. Lieutenant, we were briefed on your situation. He paused. The briefing was inadequate. It usually is, she said. Tough team. South Slope has an assault element that stalled approximately 14 minutes ago. They have not retreated. They have stopped. Your arrival changes their calculus. I need your people on the south crest immediately, and I need 2 soldiers on the hollow perimeter until I tell you otherwise. He was already signaling his team before she finished. Done. What else? Medical. I have wounded personnel on the ridgeline, 3 soldiers minor to moderate trauma. My medic has been running since 0600. She needs support. I have a combat medic with me. Send them to Corporal Reyes. She'll brief the status. Ose nodded and moved. Elena watched him go with the quiet appreciation she reserved for people who received information and acted on it without requiring it to be repeated. Kale appeared at her left shoulder. He had materialized from the dark the way Kale had been materializing from the dark all day, quietly, efficiently, at the moment he was needed. His face was a map of the last 15 hours. She could read every engagement in it. QRF is staged, he said. South slope element is pulling back. I can hear them moving downhill. They were waiting to see if we had anything left, Elena said. Now they know we do. Do we? She looked at him. We have 12 fresh soldiers in a position they have been trying to take all day and haven't. She paused. Yes, we do. He was quiet for a moment, then quietly, Voss, your shoulder. She looked down. In the low light of the QRF vehicles below, she could see what she had not been able to see clearly in the dark. Left side of her jacket was soaked through, not damp, soaked. Reyes's packing had held through the afternoon and into the night, but the run across the ridge at 7:26 p.m. had done what it had done, and the 14 minutes standing at the hollow entrance had done the rest. She had been bleeding steadily for approximately 90 minutes. I'm aware, she said. You need to sit down. I will. Now, Voss. She turned and looked at him with the specific expression she used when she was about to decline something and wanted the other person to understand that the declination was final. He met it without flinching, which she noted. Then her right knee decided to offer its own opinion on the matter, and she sat down. Not gracefully, not unintentionally. The knee simply declined to continue bearing weight in the manner it had been asked to bear it for the past several hours, and the decision was made without her input. She went down onto the rock, and Kael was beside her in the same motion, and Reyes's voice came from 3 meters away with the sharp authority of a medic who had been watching this moment coming for 6 hours. Don't you dare move, Reyes said, already kneeling. Either of you. Elena did not move. She sat in the rock at the entrance to the hollow that still held 14 living people with the sound of QRF soldiers establishing positions on the ridge above her and the sound of the assault element withdrawing down the south slope below her, and she let Reyes work on her shoulder with the focused, practiced competence that she had trusted since 0600 and trusted now completely. The pain when Reyes removed the compromised packing was significant. Elena processed it and set it aside the way she set everything aside that was not immediately actionable, which was a skill she had spent years developing and which did not. She acknowledged privately make her a particularly easy patient. You should have told me, Reyes said. Not accusatory, just a statement of fact delivered in the tone of someone who was simultaneously angry and too professional to let the anger interfere with the work. You had 63 people to manage, Elena said, and now I have one who let herself bleed for 90 minutes because she didn't want to be a distraction. Reyes tied off the new packing with a firmness that was only partially medically necessary. I'm adding this to my after-action report. Noted. I'm serious. I know you are. That's why I noted it. Reyes sat back and looked at her. In the low light, her face carried the specific exhaustion of a medic at the end of a mass casualty day. The kind of exhaustion that went past the body and into something deeper. The place where all the decisions about who needed what and when had been filed and processed and were now sitting in a pile that would need to be gone through at some point when there was time. There was not yet time. The 49, Elena said. Any updates? Ferrara's been monitoring the hospital frequency. All 49 arrived. Surgical cases are in theater. The rest are stable. Reyes paused. All of them, Voss. Elena absorbed that. All of them. She had held the ridge long enough for all 49 to get out and all 49 to arrive. She had not known that until this moment, and the knowing of it now landed in a place that was past relief and past satisfaction. It landed in the place where the thing you did a thing for becomes real, where the abstraction of a decision resolves into the concrete fact of living people. She said nothing for a moment. Then, the 14 into the hollow, extraction is first light. Helicopters are staged. Drast confirmed an hour ago. First visibility, they move. Then we hold until first light. Reyes said with precision, hold until first light by sitting exactly where you are and letting Ose's people run the perimeter. Elena opened her mouth. Sergeant. Reyes said, and her voice carried something that Elena had not heard from her all day. Not insubordination, nothing close to it, but the specific human directness of someone who had earned the right to say the true thing by spending 15 hours proving their commitment to the mission. You have done everything. Everything that could be done, and several things that couldn't. The ridge is not falling tonight. It held because of you, and it will stay held because of you and the 12 people Osei just put on the crest. But if you stand up right now and go back out there, you will fall down somewhere on this ridge, and I will have to come find you in the dark. And I have had enough of finding things in the dark today. A pause. Please, Reyes said. Sit. Elena sat. At 10:17 p.m., Carver appeared from inside the hollow and sat down near her without asking permission, which was fine because she would have told him to sit anyway. His left arm was in an improvised sling that Reyes had put on him sometime in the late afternoon. His right hand was resting on his knee, and his eyes were looking out at the dark in the direction of the south slope. The specific, unfocused gaze of someone whose body was present and whose mind was still processing a day it had not finished understanding. 4 drones, he said. What? I got 4 of the 5. The 5th one I missed it twice, and then it just lost signal on its own. Fell into the ravine. He paused. I want it on the record that I didn't miss it. It had a malfunction. She almost smiled. It was the first time all day she had almost smiled and felt it reach her eyes. It's on the record, she said. He nodded, looked at his sling. Sergeant, can I ask you something? You're going to regardless. He almost smiled too, just for a second. When they sent that ceasefire offer this afternoon, when that officer came up with our prisoner and offered to let the wounded go if we surrendered the ridge, I heard what you said to Drast afterward, that you recommended holding. He paused. Did you ever think about saying yes? She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Every decision I made today had an alternative, she said. I thought about the alternative every time. That's not doubt. That's how you know your decision is actually a decision and not just the only thing you could think of. She paused. I thought about saying yes, and then I thought about what saying yes meant for the people who'd be extracted, and then I thought about what it meant for the people who'd still be here and for the ridge itself, and for every soldier in this range who'd be facing a more confident enemy tomorrow because they'd managed to take this position. She stopped. Saying yes was the easier answer, so I said no. Carver absorbed this. That's a hard way to make decisions, he said. Yes, she agreed. It is. He was quiet for a long time after that. Not uncomfortable quiet, the kind of quiet that sits between 2 people who have been through the same day and are both still working out what it means. Webb arrived at 11:40 p.m., moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body had delivered a very clear message about its current capabilities and who was honoring that message without quite admitting to doing so. He sat down on Elena's right side without ceremony and without asking permission, which she had also been expecting. He had a cut above his right eye that Reyes had closed with 3 strips of tape, and his hands, which she could see clearly now in the light from Osei's vehicle, were shaking with the fine involuntary tremor that came after the body burned through everything it had been running on and started the long process of accounting for the debt. He noticed her looking at his hands and looked at them too, with the detached, almost curious expression of someone watching an instrument behave unexpectedly. They'll stop, he said. I know, she said. I'm not scared. That's not what this is. I know what it is. He looked at her. Do they ever stop happening? After days like this? She thought about it honestly rather than giving him the answer that was easy. The days stop happening as often as she said. The hands less reliable. But yes, they stop. He nodded slowly, looked out at the dark. Voss, he said after a moment, in 14 hours I watched you fire from 8 different positions, run across this ridge in full darkness, fight close quarters with an empty magazine, and stand at the hollow entrance with nothing left and not move. He paused. What was that? The last part. What were you doing? Holding the position, she said. You had no ammunition. They didn't know that. But you knew it. Yes. And you stayed. Yes. He thought about that. Then, most people would have called that hopeless. Most people would have been right, she said. But hopeless and pointless aren't the same thing. There were 14 people behind me. Standing there wasn't hopeless for them, so I stood. Webb was quiet for a long time after that. The night passed. Not quickly it passed the way nights passed after days that had required everything slowly, with the specific weight of hours that had been earned rather than simply experienced. Elena stayed at the hollow entrance. She did not sleep. She was aware with a clinical detachment that was the last professional instinct still fully operational, that she was past the threshold where sleep deprivation began to meaningfully affect decision-making. And she was also aware that there were no more decisions requiring her specific decision-making capacity tonight. Osei had the perimeter, Reyes had the medical situation, Kale had the communications. She sat and she was still, and she let the night do what nights did. At 3:47 a.m. Kale sat down beside her. He had a canteen and 2 ration bars, and he put one of the ration bars in her hand without asking which was the correct approach and the one she would have taken with anyone else in the same situation. She ate it. Intelligence report just came through from FOB Karvash, Kale said. Osei shared it. She waited. Enemy force assessment for the day. Total personnel committed to the Eastern Ridge assault 412. Their estimated casualty figures from the engagement. He paused, and she heard in the pause the quality of a man who had read something and was still processing what it meant. 106 casualties killed and wounded. Their after-action assessment of the defensive force transmitted on an unsecured frequency that our signals unit intercepted. Another pause. Estimated 40 to 50 defensive personnel with multiple sniper teams. Elena said nothing. 40 to 50, Kale repeated quietly. They hit this ridge 5 times with over 400 soldiers, and they left believing they had been held by 40 to 50 people and multiple sniper teams. The M240 creates a signature consistent with a crew of 3, Elena said. Webb's position and my position were firing from different angles on opposite ends of the ridge throughout the day. Multiple simultaneous engagements on separate approaches. The conclusion is logical. It was you and Webb in one gun team, primarily. Kale was quiet. Then he said the thing he had been working toward since the beginning of the sentence, the thing she had known was coming from the moment he sat down. Drast is going to want a full debrief. Command is going to want a full debrief. There are going to be questions about what happened on this ridge today that I don't think any standard after-action template is equipped to answer. They'll find a template, she said. Voss. 106 casualties on their side. 1 defensive sniper as the primary engagement element. 5 assault waves held for, he checked his watch, 22 hours. He stopped. What do you call that? She thought about the question seriously because it deserved a serious answer, and Kyle deserved a serious answer. A decision, she said, made once at the beginning of the day and then kept. He was quiet for a long time. Then what was the decision? Not to leave. At 5:51 a.m., exactly 24 hours after she had fired the first shot of the morning, the cloud ceiling broke. It did not break gradually or politely. It broke the way weather in the Karvash range always broke suddenly and completely. One moment an opaque ceiling, and the next a sky that was startling in its depth, the pre-dawn darkness already edged with the first gray suggestion of light along the eastern peaks. Ferrara's voice on the radio, and there was something in it that Elena had not heard from her since the previous morning, something lighter. Something that was not quite joy, but was adjacent to it, in the way that relief is adjacent to joy, when what you've been relieved of was the weight of real danger. Helicopters are moving. Drast confirmed. ETA, 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Elena stood up. Her body objected to this with considerable specificity. The shoulder, the knee, the general categorical protest of a system that had been asked to do too much for too long and was presenting its invoice. She processed the objection and stood anyway because the helicopters were coming and she was the senior NCO on the Eastern Ridge, and she was going to be on her feet when they arrived. Reyes appeared from inside the hollow. Helicopters are moving, she said. I heard. The 14 are ready to move. They know the drill. She paused. Carver is arguing that he should stay and help load rather than be loaded himself. Tell him that loading the others is his job and he cannot do his job if he doesn't move with them. Reyes almost smiled. I already told him that. Did it work? It worked better coming from you. The helicopters came in at 6:09 a.m., 2 of them threading through the Karvash peaks in the cold morning light with the specific, purposeful beauty of machines doing exactly what they were built to do in the moment they were most needed. Elena stood at the edge of the hollow clearing and watched the loading with the focused attention she had brought to every critical operation of the previous 24 hours. Carver was the last one loaded. He walked to the helicopter under his own power with the stubborn, deliberate stride of a man who had decided how he was going to end this day. At the door, he stopped and turned and looked at Elena across the clearing. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. He got on the helicopter. She watched it lift, watched both of them lift, climbing away from the ridge into the cold Carvash morning, banking south toward the FOB and the hospital and the rest of their lives. She stood and watched until she could no longer see them. Then Kyle was at her elbow, and his voice had a careful quality that made her pay attention to it. "Drast is on the radio. He wants to speak with you directly." She took the handset. Drast's voice was different than it had been at any point in the previous 24 hours. The operational efficiency was still there, but underneath it was something she had not heard from him before, a quality that was not exactly emotion, but was the specific sound of a man revising a belief he had held firmly and not enjoying the revision and doing it anyway because he was the kind of man who did that. "Voss, sir, the ridge didn't fall." "No, sir. The wounded survived. All of them. The 49 who extracted yesterday afternoon, the 14 who just lifted, all confirmed alive and en route." "Yes, sir." A pause. "I'm looking at the intelligence summary that came in overnight. The enemy's estimate of your defensive force was 40 to 50 personnel. I heard. Their operational after-action calls this engagement a tactical failure caused by underestimating the defensive force and its command capability." Another pause longer. "They don't know. They still don't know it was effectively one sniper." "No, sir." She heard him breathe. "Voss, before you left for the ridge, I told you that you couldn't hold that position alone." He stopped. "I was wrong." She thought about what to say to that. She thought about Morrow in the briefing room with his barely concealed skepticism. She thought about the soldier on the truck who had gripped the wheel like it owed him something. She thought about Ferrara transmitting with 4-second accuracy while mortar rounds walked up the ridge. She thought about Webb with shaking hands and a rifle held like a club. She thought about Carver shooting drones with one good arm. She thought about Cale, who had waited to form his judgment and formed it honestly. "Sir," she said, "with respect, you were right." A silence. "I wasn't alone," she said. Drast was quiet for a moment. Then, and his voice carried the weight of it, "No, you weren't." At 7:33 a.m., Elena Voss walked the eastern ridge for the last time. Not an inspection, the QRF had the ridge properly secured now. Osei's people augmented by a second team that had arrived at 0530. She walked it because she needed to, because there was something in her that required the physical act of moving across this ground one more time before she left it, required the confirmation that it was still here, still standing. Still the same ridge she had walked in the dark 27 hours ago, with Kyle at her side and a list of problems that had seemed unsurvivable. She walked the south edge and the east crest in the north end where Webb had fought in the dark. She walked past the hollow entrance, empty now, quiet the supply crates that Carver had used as cover still in place. She walked to the highest point of the south ridge, the position she had used at the turning point of the second assault wave, the one that had briefly silhouetted her against the sky and that she had judged worth the risk. She stood there in the morning light and looked out over the valley below. The assault element was gone. Not in retreat, exactly dispersed, having made the overnight calculation that a position that had cost them what this one had cost them was not a position their remaining force could take. The tree lines were empty. The shale field below was quiet and cold and carrying the evidence of 5 assault waves in ways she looked at directly and then looked away from. The ridge was hers. It had always been hers. From the moment she walked out of that briefing room with Drast's voice behind her, saying things that were accurate about the math and wrong about what the math meant. From the moment she lay in the granite depression in the dark before dawn and breathed and was ready. It had been hers not because command assigned it to her and not because she had won it in any clean or unambiguous sense, but because she had made a decision to stay and had kept it through every reason not to, through every assault wave and ammunition count and mortar round and sleepless hour. Webb appeared beside her. He had always had a talent for that. Helicopter for us in 20 minutes, he said. Osei's orders. Drast confirmed. Copy. He stood next to her and looked out over the valley. For what it's worth, he said. I think you should know that the men on this ridge, Kyle, Patel, Ferrara, all of them, they're not going to talk about the things they normally talk about after an engagement. They're not going to compare statistics or replay decisions or argue about what went wrong. He paused. They're going to talk about you. For the rest of their levees, they're going to talk about this day and what they watch one person do. She said nothing for a moment. I don't need them to talk about me, she said. I know, he said. That's probably part of it. She looked out at the valley for a longer moment. Then she turned and began walking back toward the helicopter landing zone, and Webb fell into step beside her, and behind her the eastern ridge stood in the cold Carvache morning, exactly as it had stood the night before she arrived, unmoved, unbroken, indifferent to everything that had been asked of it and asked of the people who had chosen to stand on it. In the military hospital at FOB Carvache, 3 days later, Colonel Drast came to see her. She was sitting up in the bed with the specific, barely contained restlessness of a person whose body had been informed that it was resting, whether it cooperated or not, and who was cooperating under protest. Her shoulder had required surgery. The shrapnel had gone deeper than Reyes's field assessment had been able to determine. And the 90 minutes of continued bleeding had required 2 units of blood that the surgical team had delivered with the calm efficiency of people who had seen worse and were glad this wasn't it. Drast came in and sat in the chair beside the bed and put his hands on his knees and looked at her with the direct, unembellished regard of a man who had come to say something and was going to say it. The after-action is complete, he said. The enemy's full operational assessment was intercepted and translated overnight. I want to read you one line. She waited. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. He read, the defensive capability of the Eastern Ridge position exceeded all projected parameters. The force demonstrated command cohesion, tactical flexibility, and sustained precision engagement capacity, inconsistent with estimated personnel numbers. Recommend full intelligence reassessment of opposing defensive doctrine. He folded the paper. They wrote a doctrine recommendation, he said, because of one engagement, because of one ridge. Elena said nothing. The review board is recommending a formal commendation, Drast said. The paperwork has already been submitted. I signed it myself. He paused. I also amended the after-action report to include a personal note from the commanding officer. It states that the initial assessment of the Eastern Ridge's defensive potential was incorrect and that the error was mine. She looked at him. You didn't have to do that, she said. No, he agreed. I didn't. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with everything that had been said in the briefing room 5 days ago and everything that had happened in the 24 hours after it. Colonel, she said, can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you assigned me to that ridge, when you knew what the numbers were, did you believe I could hold it? He was quiet for a long moment, the honest kind of quiet. No, Karek, he said. I believed you were the best available option for a position that was going to fall. I believed you could make it expensive enough that the Western Pass defense would hold. I believed you could delay long enough for the weather to turn. He paused. I did not believe one person could stop 5 assault waves for 22 hours and bring every wounded soldier home. She nodded slowly. Neither did I, she said. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not surprise exactly, but the recalibration of a man encountering honesty he hadn't expected in the form it arrived. Then why, he said. Why did you stay when you knew the ammunition was gone and the waves kept coming and the math kept being wrong? Why didn't you call for evacuation? You had the authority. I would have authorized it. She thought about the question the way she had thought about Carver's question in the dark, with the seriousness it deserved. Because there were 63 people in that hollow who couldn't walk out, she said, and then 49 who couldn't walk out, and then 14 who couldn't walk out. She paused. You don't leave people who can't walk out. That's not strategy. That's not doctrine. That's just the one thing that doesn't get negotiated. Drast was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up. He looked at her one more time with the expression of a man who had revised a belief and was living in the uncomfortable space of what that revision meant. Rest, he said. That is an order. He walked out. Elena sat in the hospital bed in the silence he left behind and looked at the ceiling and thought about none of it and all of it simultaneously, the way the mind does when it has finally been given the space to process what the body has already long since finished surviving. She thought about the first shot at 5:51 a.m. and the last shot at 8:44 p.m. She thought about 37 rounds and 5 assault waves and 63 people who were alive. She thought about Webb's hands and Reyes's voice, and Carver at the helicopter door, not saying anything, not needing to. She thought about the ridge in the morning light, standing the way it had always stood. She did not call it a victory because victory implied that the point had been winning and the point had never been winning. The point had been the people in the hollow. The point had been the decision made at 0400 in a small briefing room when a colonel told her the math didn't work, and she walked out the door and went to where the math was happening and stayed until it did. Some decisions are made with a strategy and resources and calculated probability. Some decisions are made with the single clear knowledge of what you are not willing to leave behind. Elena Voss made hers once, and she kept it until every last person came home.